That's probably better. Okay. It says we are live, ladies and gentlemen. So welcome so much, and happy 20th anniversary to one of my favorite AVAs in the world, if not my favorite AVA in the world, American Viticultural Area, and that is the Santa Rita Hills. And we can spell it out because it's not on a label. We'll talk a little bit about that. SANTA Rita Hills. Welcome, everybody. We're going to have a great conversation today about a little bit about the founding and the history of the Santa Rita Hills. My name is Wes Hagen. I was the original scribe for the project of the AVA petition, and I've written a few AVA petitions within Santa Barbara County. We're going to start out introducing ourselves a little bit, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to start right away sharing our screen, and hopefully you will all be able to see this. Okay, you think by now I will probably have done this a few thousand times during the plague times. All right, you guys can see that?
Yep.
Super.
Yeah.
All right. So what I'm going to ask Richard Sanford, why don't you take a couple minutes, give us a little bit about your background and about what the Santa Rita Hills means to you in this 20th anniversary.
Gee, Wes, it's a big story. I've been here about 50 years. And so it's been a place that I've lived and loved, and I'm just grateful for having had the experience to be here. And as Rick and I were talking earlier, that it's been so special for both of us to be sort of on the ground floor of something quite remarkable that's happened here that won't happen again, because it was really the beginning of the whole thing. And it's wonderful now that as I came back from war in Vietnam, recognizing that I needed to be in nature, I chose an activity that has resonated well with me. So I'm grateful to be here, Wes. I planted a vineyard back in 1971 with Michael Benedict called the Sanford and Benedict Vineyard. Began producing in 1976. And so I recognize by, well, it was the first vineyard in the region. And a lot of the activity was going into the Santa Ynez Valley, and the vineyards being planted there were mostly Cabernet. So wine writers up in Napa, well, wine writers in general at that time were recognizing that Santa Maria was the place for Pinot Noir, and this region was the place for Cabernet. And so I was concerned about that, and Rick showed me some of the early papers, the meetings that we had. And in 1997, we had our first meeting to talk about trying to differentiate ourselves, not to be better, but to be different. And that's the inception of the whole Santa Rita Hills, as I remember.
Yeah, and not only did you make a wine in 1976, Dan Berger, who I think at the time was writing for the LA Times, called it the finest domestic Pinot Noir he'd ever tasted. And Dan has a heck of a palate. So, I mean, from basically leaving a Navy destroyer to making the finest example of domestic Pinot Noir all within, 10 years? I'd have to say congratulations.
Thank you very much.
You bet. We're going to move to, go ahead.
We just ended up in the right place.
Indeed. It's provenance and where hard work meets preparation. Bryan Babcock, the man who taught me to make wine. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit of what Santa Rita Hills means for you?
We started in 1984 was our first harvest. I was actually scheduled to go back to school that year. I was a graduate student at University of California at Davis, studying fermentation science. After becoming interested in fermentation and wine, after my parents had purchased our property, what is now Babcock Winery and Vineyard, in 1979. So I graduated from an undergraduate, and then went to Davis for a couple of years and spent 2 years doing nothing but taking coursework, because when I got there, I realized coming from the food science department, I wasn't even going to get any of the viticulture classes, which made no sense to me. So I just grabbed my tape recorder and sat in on every class I could get my hands on. I didn't do any research. So in what would have been my third year in 1984, I was supposed to go back to school and do something to get my degree. And that was a warm summer. And our Gewürztraminer came in very early that year. In August, I was scheduled to go back to school like the second week of September. And I started crushing grapes with my dad, and I forgot about school. And this is what I've been doing ever since. And I've had the good fortune to run into to guys like Richard Sanford and Rick Longoria, who have been great mentors and, encouraging and just sort of celebratory all the way. And even you, Wes, even though you started working for me, now it's like, dude, you're just like a warrior poet for the AVA and all things wine. And so, the whole experience, I'm getting nudging up next to my 40th year in this business, which just seems crazy, but the whole thing, it's been a wild and beautiful ride. And with what's going on at this point in the development of the Santa Rita Hills, not even just the Santa Rita Hills, but the entire county, for gosh sake, Santa Barbara County is just exploding with new things and new vineyards everywhere. And it's a really exciting time, and it never has not been exciting, but right now is a particularly exciting time to be a winemaker in the Santa Rita Hills, if not the whole county.
There's absolutely no doubt about it. It's funny, the first day I came to work for you, another Santa Barbara winemaker had his first day. Joey Tensley and I both had the first day working in the same winery, same year, same vintage. I just actually, it's crazy. So a lot of University of Babcock, baby, taking over Zach Mesa. We're absolutely loving it. Thank you so much for coming on. And why don't you tell the world where you did your undergrad? Because I've heard it's a pretty good school.
Occidental College.
Where basically my entire family,
which is where I met my beautiful wife, Lisa, who now works with me in the winery, and she's the mind behind the most fantastic tasting room on the planet. And all things vintage and rock and roll and love and soul are in one room. So I would encourage anybody and everybody to come out and see it. It's really a phenomenon. And then I think, Wes, maybe some people in your family might have gone to Occidental College. I think,
so many that went to Redlands, it was kind of a coup. But yeah, small liberal arts colleges, go. And if you haven't been to Bryan's tasting room, it's been a couple of years since I've been, but it was really an amazing experience. And if you haven't seen what he's been doing recently on social media, you've really upped your social media game in the last year or two. I'm sure it had nothing to do with plague times. All right, let's move on. We've got lots of other questions for the panel, but I'd love to hear from Rick Longoria, definitely producing some of my favorite wines in the history of Santa Barbara County. Rick, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about what the Santa Rita Hills means to you?
Absolutely. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with my friends. We go back so many years. As a matter of fact, when I first came to the Valley here to help make wine in 1976, Richard and Michael Benedict were basically the first winemakers that I met in this area. And, that began my friendship with both of them. And of course, my introduction to the wines that were grown at Sanford and Benedict, and, the potential that we saw back then. And then later, in the early 80s, I began to work with Chardonnay from the Huber Vineyard and Sweeney Canyon Vineyard and Mount Carmel, and Pinot Noir from Sanford and Benedict and Mount Carmel as well. And, it was just so clear to me that, this area was so superior for growing those two grapes. Very exciting times. And it was great to see those vineyards being planted in the early 80s. And I was lucky to be able to work with those grapes. And actually, I have a tie to the Babcocks because I seem to remember when I was at Gainey that for some reason, your dad, Walt Babcock, sold me some Sauvignon Blanc grapes. Do you remember that, Bryan?
I remember it vividly, 1983. And so it was the first year that our vines
really had any kind of a crop. I was still up at University of California, Davis studying. And my dad was a fisherman, right? He knows what it feels like to stand in the cockpit of a sport fishing boat throwing out chum. Okay. Try to get those tuna excited. Right. So he had this idea. He said, I think what I need to do is I'm going to take a little bit of Chardonnay. We've got a couple tons of Chardonnay. I think I'll take that over to Jim Clendenin.
Right.
I've got probably 3 or 4 tons of Sauvignon Blanc. I think we should take some to Rick Longoria. We should take some to Fred Brander. And then he made the mistake of trying to make some Chenin Blanc himself, which was a terrible disaster. But you have to start somewhere, right? You got to start somewhere. And the feedback, really, I mean, one of the things that really prompted us, Rick, to buy some barrels and buy a crusher and buy a press was the feedback that we got from you and Jim Clendenin and Fred Brander. We took the Riesling that year up to the old Los Viñeros winery in Santa Maria. They actually made a wine for us and put our first Babcock label on it. And all the wines were stunning. The fruit was compelling. The pHs were tight. The acidities were like no winemakers had never seen these numbers, these relationships before between them. Just really beautiful ripeness while still retaining all this great acidity. And so my dad just felt so compelled that the next year, I started crushing Gewürztraminer and decided not to go back to school. It was just too exciting.
Yeah. That was a great memory that I have of working with your dad, that vintage, and actually later on as well. I mean, he was a wonderful man. I just so much admiration and love for your dad, Walt.
Thank you. Both your mom.
But so anyway, in the ensuing years, I was able to plant a vineyard, Faciega, in 1998, and was part of that explosion of Pinot Noir in Santa Rita Hills in the early 90s, or I should say late 90s, early 2000s. And, I've had the pleasure of working with so many different vineyards in Santa Rita Hills. And it's just a big part of our brand, Longoria brand, and a big part of my career. And it's just, it's great to see now that 20 years later, it's a very well recognized AVA, and so many new players in the appellation contributing. I should also have a shout out to Greg Brewer, who was early on a scribe for the meetings, and obviously has become an incredible spokesperson and ambassador for Santa Rita Hills. So here's to Greg.
Here's to Greg. That's absolutely correct. Up on your screen, you see an original map of the original perfected boundaries of the Santa Rita Hills as they were approved back originally in 2001. What I wanted to just say is the easiest way that I've ever described to understand the Santa Rita Hills is if you were looking at the Santa Rita Hills like this from a map, I always think about the Santa Rita Hills like a W. Like you have the Purisima Hills that come down to make one valley of the W. Then you have the Santa Rita Hills, which are really like the spine of the AVA. I like to call it the shark fin, because just like a shark fin, it directs the water, it directs the fog, it directs the wind right down these two valleys, the Highway 246 corridor in the north, which would be the first swoop of the W, and then the Santa Rosa Road corridor in the south, which I consider sort of the south. So you kind of have north-facing hillsides of the Santa Rosas, north and south-facing hillsides of the Santa Ritas, and the south-facing hillsides of the Purisimas. Just wanted to give sort of an orientation. Of course, we are talking about between Lompoc and Buellton, and our original idea was to keep the Santa Rita Hills basically contained within these tight east-west valleys, and to stop the AVA before the areas that opened up into larger, more open and less torturous areas for the wind to go down. The last thing that I wanted to show is 20 million years in 15 seconds. Are you ready? Notice that Santa Barbara is closer to San Diego than San Francisco. Watch what happens. By the way, if you are made out of a mineral, you should probably step out of the room, because this is one of the most violent tectonic shifts as the Juan de Fuca, the North American, and the Pacific Plate basically are going NC-17 over the last 20 million years. Watch the plates. 16 million years, 12 million years ago, 8 million years ago, 4 million years ago, and then the drainage, and then my goodness. And if you wonder why the coast of California is so jagged, and there's so many just amazing and incredible. This was made by Tanya Atwater, who is a professor emeritus at UC Santa Barbara. But it's just one of my favorite things to see how things start. That the land that used to be Santa Barbara used to be probably about where Murrieta and Temecula are, and has been ripped off the tectonic plate, yanked up the coast of California, and the north-south mountain ranges turned 90 degrees to give us these east-west transverse maritime throat, the purest east-west valleys anywhere on the Pacific coast from Chile to Alaska. Anybody want to make any comment on this before I move on?
I think it's a great presentation. Thank you so much, Wes.
Well, I'm just riding on Tanya Atwater, and if you ever met Tanya Atwater, she reminds me of like a Hogwarts professor. She is just so fun and quirky. I just love her. So no one's seen these pictures since 1997. Excuse me. Yes, 1997. I've got 4 different photographs of us actually sort of trespassing and doing what we needed to do. This might actually be up at Casa Casara.
Yeah, it looks like it's got pretty good elevation.
Yeah. I think we chose Casa Casara up at the top of the vineyard because it had such an amazing view of all the different hillsides. And we'll be talking a little bit about this process, but I wanted to ground it. That's Bryan Babcock on the left, Rick Longoria in the middle, and Dan Gainey on the right. Richard, I would love to know how you found the site for Sanford and Benedict, because what you did basically is set the stage for an entire AVA. And then if you want to talk a little bit about the early challenges, maybe include what grapes that you planted that didn't work. I thought that would be a great sort of early vision of how this place was found, what were the early problems, whether it's irrigation or almost drowning in a tank of Riesling, and maybe what grapes did you plant that eventually got yanked out?
Gee, Wes, that's a lot on the plate. Let me just start by talking about the very early days and the experiences of transitioning into a new growing area, a new sort of agriculture in this region. This was mostly cattle ground. It was the old Rancho Period finished, and the cattle were moving over into other kinds of agriculture. I decided that it was appealing to me to be a grower. I had decided I wanted to be in nature, and this was my avenue to nature. And there was some excitement at that time about what was going on here in the coastal area of California. And people recognized that there was a developing interest in wine, and people were coming out and planting vineyards in the coastal region. And here we were out here on the coast. The value of our grapes was far superior to the value of Central Coast grapes. The Central Valley grapes were $52 a ton. Here on the coast, they were $150 a ton. And so that was a big deal those days, and it allowed us to prospect for new growing areas. And it was my feeling. I had been introduced to a beautiful Volnay when I was in the Navy in San Diego, and I thought if I should be in the wine business, ultimately thinking back to I think it's really the texture of that wine that drove me to try and find a place to grow Pinot Noir. And after doing some research, I recognized that we needed cooler climates. And so trying to identify, I had studied geography at UC Berkeley. And after identifying some climates on the map, I drove around and looked at different aspects with a thermometer in my car. And my friends thought I'd gone mad. But I persevered and found as I drove up and down these roads and these, I think you did a great job, Wes, of presenting the transverse mountains, which I became aware of, and the remarkable climates within the transverse mountains. So I figured it was about a degree a mile as you transited east and west. And I began looking for land, and I found an old dilapidated bean farm that was on an old landslide, and these wonderful undersea rocks were slid and developed this beautiful chert rock stone that is so well drained. And I decided to look to see who the owner was and pursued that and found some partners. It's a very long story, but I'm so grateful to have been involved in every aspect of it. And,
There was one question from PF Guitar on YouTube. Sanford and Benedict Vineyard was originally going to be a reservoir. Is that correct?
No, the story is that at that point in time, the real estate people in Lompoc had dreamed up an idea.
Oh, I think we lost Richard. Hopefully he'll be back very soon. I think what he was going to say is they were going to actually make a lake, which that's why a lot of those areas on that side they're called lakeside or something, like the Kargasaki property and maybe Faciega. Do you, Brian or Rick, you know the story?
Well, yeah, it's called Lakeview Estates. And yeah, that's, and I don't know the exact dates or anything. I would estimate maybe the late 50s, early 60s when that dam was planned. And so some developer bought, I don't know, 1,000 acres or whatever on the north side of the river there and divided it into 40-acre plots and began, his plan was to sell it as Lakeview Estates, so a view of the lake. And again, I don't know the history why the dam never was built, or perhaps it was, what created Lake Kachuma instead of near Lompoc.
Brandon adds that he believes that it was negotiated not to do it in Sweeney Canyon or in the Sweeney area, and that the Santa Barbara distinct species of the California tiger salamander was the source of the issue. That sounds great. I want to make sure that we get back to Richard when he comes, but I am going to pop it over. I'm going to put up my screen again. And there it is. Good thing okay. And then what I want to do next is, boy, look at the hair. Obviously, I was not nearly swarthy enough to hang out with this crew, because that's like Italian and Portuguese freaking, like, I might be able to grow as much stubble as Dan in that picture. Rick, I want a couple of questions to throw out there. What are your earliest memories of Vineyard's fruit? You already told us about some Sauvignon Blanc that you got from Babcock, but feel free about your ideas and earliest memories of Santa Rita Hills. And then what would you consider, this I think is the big question that I really wanted you to answer. What would you consider the defining characteristics of Santa Rita Hills Pinot Noir and Chardonnay? And then if you'd like to finish by, sometimes it takes blind faith. Notice that that is lowercase to plant a vineyard. So tell us a little bit about Faciega as well.
Okay. Well, yeah, I have mentioned, my introduction to the Santa Rita Hills through Richard and Michael at Sanford and Benedict, and then my early exposure to the Chardonnay grapes from Huber Vineyard, Sweeney. I was the winemaker at the Gainey Vineyard during that time, and the Gainey Vineyard was built on the premise of being an estate winery. So they planted 50 acres around their winery and had no plans to source grapes from outside that estate. When I was interviewed to be the winemaker, one of the things I proposed was the concept of maybe going out to buy grapes outside their estate if I felt that the quality would be superior to what they had on their property. And there was a little reluctance to that concept, but after after just a year, the Gainies finally relented, and I was able to source Chardonnay. Actually, I think I got Norm Huber's first crop, and the Marks family, their first crop of Chardonnay in 1984. And I think, my interest in grapes grown in that area stemmed from my exposure to Sanford and Benedict wines. And to me, it's still a little puzzling as to why the vineyard was planted in 1971, and virtually no other vineyards were planted around them until the early 80s, when we saw Norm Huber and the Marks family plant theirs, the Babcocks with their property. And it's just so interesting to me that, there was so much promise there and the wine was so heralded, but nonetheless, there was just no planting to follow up on that concept. So, but in any case, it happened in the 80s, and then I've worked with Mount Carmel. Bryan, you can speak more about that vineyard, how that was established. But I was lucky enough to source grapes for a number of years from that vineyard. And then later with Blanc Cantata, I've made Pinot Noir from Blanc Cantata, and Chardonnay from the vineyards that Foley owns, Chardonnay from that ranch, and also from the spacing out here right across the street, the Chardonnay from Zodovich. Excuse me, sure. Zodovich, yeah.
Sandy.
Yes, yeah, that is the Sandy corridor right there. But so that's my experience with the vineyards. In terms of winemaking, or how the wines reflect their appellation, it really comes down to, well, there is a difference between the wines that are made along the 246 corridor. The soils are sort of, generally speaking, on the sandy side, and on the Santa Rosa Road corridor, they tend to be more clay-based. And I think that has a difference. That makes a difference in the wine, the characteristics of the wine. In the sandy soils, my experience has been that, again, talking about Pinot Noir more than Chardonnay, because Chardonnay seems to be not quite as impacted, I think, by soil type. There's a lot of clonal variation with Chardonnay, which I think makes a difference, and of course in how you make it. But with Pinot Noir, it does show the soil in which it's grown. And in the sandier soils, I have found the Pinot Noirs to be more transparent. They tend to have a little bit lighter color. Their body is a little bit, has more vitality. It doesn't have the density of the wines that are grown in the clay soils. And so it's, makes beautiful Pinot Noir, but of a different type of than the wines made on the Santa Rosa Road corridor, that tend to have more intensity, higher tannins, maybe not quite as aromatically open. They take longer to open up, and the texture and flavor, it take longer to open up as well. So that's been my experience with the two different areas within Santa Rita Hills. And the Chardonnay is, I think, overlooked. I think the Chardonnays from Santa Rita Hills are every bit as good as the Pinot Noirs. It's just that Pinot Noir, especially after the movie Sideways, it just got all the attention, and rightly so. I mean, it makes a beautiful wine in Santa Rita Hills. But all along, the Chardonnays have been incredible. They've never not made great Chardonnay, world-class Chardonnay from Santa Rita Hills. And I think slowly that's starting to change. I think the critics and consumers are starting to acknowledge extremely high quality of Santa Rita Hills Chardonnay. And then as far as having blind faith, well, Fe Ciega, it's the one and only vineyard I've ever had anything to do with in terms of planting. I mean, as a winemaker, you deal with vineyards and grape growers all the time, but I had never actually gone through the process of designing a vineyard, of selecting the clones, seeing the grapevines arrive, seeing them planted, seen 1/3 of them die within 6 weeks because they were poorly grafted, and then having to replant the next year, and just all the trials that a grape grower goes through. And it was, having that experience that I realized what an act of faith it is to plant a vineyard, that there is no guarantee that your expense, your time, your suffering over this agricultural pursuit is going to yield the wine that you hope for. It's really a crapshoot, or an act of blind faith. Right. You of all people experience that, Brian.
Spot on. You're absolutely
Yeah.
spot on, dude. I
Yeah.
mean, yes, it is.
Well, and also a child of the 60s, as I am, it refers to that super group, Blind Faith, that Eric Clapton led.
I
And
see,
in fact,
I see a skinny naked woman in front of me for some reason.
Well, yes, underage. The four blocks that I originally planted are named after each of the band members. So there's an Eric Clapton block, a Ginger Baker, Rick Gretsch, and Stevie Winwood. So
Who was 17 years old when he recorded "Give Me Some Lovin'."
yeah, sounded like a great Ray Charles, right?
What a talent! What a
Yeah.
talent! I got a
Anyway,
question for you.
That's Faith Siega.
If
And
Chardonnay,
I should bring everybody up to date
yes,
and let you know that Faith Siega has been sold to my good friend Adam Tomac.
whoa,
So as of January this year, Adam has purchased the property, taking over the vineyard. I'm very relieved, both not to have the farming duties, but also that he's agreed to continue to sell me grapes. So now, instead of me selling him grapes, he is selling me grapes. And so that's a great partnership.
I'm feeling, I mean, obviously I have my guru here who taught me to make wine, and I've loved Brian's wines all the way through. But as far as my love for Santa Barbara wine, I think it channels through Adam Tomac and yourself, Rick, as far as anybody else in the county. So the idea that there's like a mashup, like that there's going to be some grooviness going on between Adam and you, that just gets
It
me
has been for quite a while. Yeah,
And I had a
it's
question.
wonderful. It's
I did have a question
really great.
for either of you, but I'll start with Rick. If Chardonnay was given the areas in Santa Rita Hills that Pinot Noir is given, because generally we grow Pinot Noir on the hillsides, we give Pinot Noir the greatest places, the greatest aspects, the greatest hills, the greatest soil, and then we just shove the Chardonnay wherever we can't grow Pinot Noir. Let's reverse it. Would that have any impact, or was it just sideways doing for Santa Barbara County wine what the Soviet Union did for socialism, going from sort of viticultural, sort of feudalism to postmodernism without even reading Marx?
Well, I've noted that I think Chardonnay is really not as particular about where it's planted as Pinot Noir, but certainly I think it deserves more thought, going forward, with plantings that we will see here. That Chardonnay, I think, will assume a higher place of importance, in terms of where it's planted and how many more acres that are planted to Chardonnay versus Pinot Noir. I mean, I think we all recognize that Pinot Noir, that we've kind of reached a plateau of our need for Pinot Noir from Santa Rita Hills, and Chardonnay should definitely be planted now more than it has been.
There's no doubt. And
and other varieties as well. I mean, Richard is drinking a Pinot Blanc, and that's a super grape for Santa Rita Hills.
An endangered species, only 350 acres left in California. And unlike a white rhino, you eat a white rhino, there's one last white rhino. Drink more Pinot Blanc, we will plant more. So
unbelievable.
50 acres.
That will be planted more.
Richard, I want to make sure that you I want to make sure before we go on to Brian, were there any challenges or grape mistakes? What you planted, what you didn't plant? I know that there was a little bit of. In fact, I'm going to go grab a bottle right now as you tell us a little bit more about sort of your experience in planting. What happened after the vineyard was planted, started producing fruit, and how things changed. I'll be right back.
Golly, I'm just having such great technology issues here. It's great to be back with you. Now on
He's now on his cell phone.
I have my technology expert.
Oh,
All right.
Technology expert, not.
well, that's a good save. Good for you, Tekla.
Cell phone
Yeah,
will
well,
be
Good for you.
sometimes you need a woman around, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
All the time.
All the time.
Look at that. It's an old,
Yeah.
old Sanford and Benedict vineyard.
Oh, you should.
Must
try
be,
this too.
1980 Cabernet Sauvignon.
Cabernet.
Oh, yes.
That's an
Good
unusual
year.
one.
Can you see this?
Well, anyway, this is an Almarosa,
It's the original
Pinot Blanc.
label. of
I
all
love
the-
that.
but the
I love
But
that.
wait, I just want to say one thing. I know I shouldn't be interrupting, especially since there are a lot of
No,
people
you're good.
listening.
You're good.
But this is a 2010
Okay.
Pinot Blanc, and I just had a sip of it.
2012.
2012, sorry. And it is fantastic.
I'm sure it is.
It's so good.
That's what I think
Bye.
Rick was saying about the structure of these wines that come from the clay soils have such structure that benefit from some additional age. So it's exciting. And I think that, to me, I think you said earlier, or someone said that there's activity, there's something going on here in the Santa Rita Hills. And, I think back on the 50 years that I've been doing this, that it has been on the cutting edge of winemaking forever. And I mean, to recognize that here, after this amount of time in the world, that we have these genuine world-class wines coming from the region. And the winemakers have come here challenged and are still stretching the limits of what's
right.
possible, and all kinds of new techniques. I mean, people come here with a dynamic attitude, and there is that sort of progressiveness that you don't find in other regions. So it's been so exciting to be here and to see the excitement of the young people, and everyone's young now.
I'm feeling
Bryan,
feel that way myself.
even Bryan, is looking at the past. I know that he's always been so young and recognizing the youth. But anyway, it's a fabulous place to be, and it has great potential for the future.
I've got my own quiver of reading glasses these days.
And I've gone progressive. Yes, and I'm not talking about my car insurance. This I thought was a great picture to introduce and start talking a little bit more with Bryan. This I think is my favorite picture from all the photographs that I took. I'm not in any of these photographs because I was behind the camera, but I love this photograph because it really shows Bryan's leadership in establishing really perfected boundaries of this AVA. And I just love to see Rick wearing his hat backwards for some reason. I don't know what it is. But we are looking at a quadrant map of an 8.5 minute series USGS topo map and trying to discover where all the contour lines are and where each hill is. And we'll get into how we almost got in trouble doing this. But there I was saying, I want to share a quick story, and then I have a couple of questions for you, Bryan. And that is, I remember in September 1996, after a long day of crushing Sauvignon Blanc, we were sitting looking over, and you were showing me where the Santa Rita School used to be. And you said, some guy from the Wine Spectator just came down and interviewed me for 25 minutes, and he's going to take that back and define what we are in the western end of the San Ynez Valley. He's going to write an article about the hopping spot of the western San Ynez Valley. And he looked at me and said, Wes, we are not the western San Ynez Valley. This is the Santa Rita Hills. That was the first moment I ever heard the term from your mouth, saying that's the definition, looking at the Santa Rita School, looking at the central geographic feature of the area, the Santa Rita Hills. Something I wanted to share because it's something that came up when I was thinking about that. And I do believe you were the driving influence with Richard on the final boundaries we drew on the barn apartment floor in Clopepi in 1997. What was your idea? What was the criteria for original inclusion into those original perfected boundaries of the Santa Rita Hills?
We really didn't know at the time. I mean, we were just,
The feeling was let's just throw it against the wall and see what sticks. But fortunately, Richard had such a good sense for geography and geology, and he provided us a table to sit at, and he provided us the maps, and we sort of outlined what we needed, at least in theory, to put an AVA together. And, there was 2 or 3 committees that were formed to try to put all this stuff together. And Wes, I think you're the guy that stood up at one of the meetings when the question was, okay, now that we have our boundaries, who's going to write this? Who's going to write the petition to the government for the AVA? And Wes, very young Wes Hagen, at the end of the table, sort of whispers, "Well, I was an English major."
Hey,
everybody pointed at Wes and said, "You're the guy. You're going to write the."
that's what a rookie does. Carries weight.
But my committee, which was, the committee to try to formulate the boundaries, was a really popular committee, at least on day one. Until we realized, this is going to take maybe longer than a couple of days to do this. And so we got in our truck and we just had the maps that Richard gave us, and we were under the impression that we needed to come up with some real points to draw the boundaries around that would make sense for the appellation to make sense. And we were dead set on the whole thing having some integrity, right? For the first time, it's like we weren't gerrymandering anything or, going down the highway or trying to keep this property. It really was, it started, the first day we started at my place, and there was maybe 15 of us that first day, maybe 18 of us. And I asked the question to the group of guys, and the question was, do you feel like you're in it right here in my vineyard? And of course the answers are, well, yeah, we're in it. We're in the heart of it. Okay, so when we stand over at Sanford and Benedict, do you feel like you're in it? Yeah, of course, we feel it. And so then the question was, we have to find out what in it means. What's it? Where does this thing start and stop? That's why we're here. That's what we got to do. And so we just kind of took off. And it's kind of one of those things where it's kind of weird, but you find yourself sitting in the back of a truck with some interested people looking at a ridgeline for an hour, because you need to understand the relationship of that ridgeline or that hilltop with respect to the ocean and where it's located, and the breeze that's coming in, and the soil types, and everything else you're trying to build around it too, right? Because you pick a hilltop or you pick a ridgeline, but then you go into another area, and then you start to look back and you go, well, maybe that's not the best hilltop over there. So it was just, we were just kind of winging it. But at the end of the day, we wanted it to have a lot of integrity. We really did put a lot of effort in to try to come up with some lines and some demarcations that were genuine. And at the end of it all, I think, I just sort of sat there looking at the map that we had created, thinking it's like Lisa asks me, my wife, with regard to so many aspects of, my this business and my career, what is God trying to tell you? And it's like, there's the capsule. I looked at this whole thing and I go, there it is. Those hilltops and those lines and those boundaries, that is solid. That is so solid.
I have a great question from Brandon. Why the cutoff on the original line on Santa Rosa Road? And I will remember saying that the east-west transverse nature of those hills, you can see at the terminus of the Highway 246 side, which was where we originally made the line, which would, of course, been right through John Sebastiano's vineyard. And then we noticed that the east-west transverse throat went far further on Santa Rosa Road and really found its terminus in a warmer spot. So we chose it, I would say, for the east-west valleys. But if you have anything to add to that, Brian, it was a good question.
What's the question specifically?
What was the question?
Why did we cut off Santa Rosa Road far further east than on 246?
Yeah, and it is because the ridge line of the Santa Rosa Hill is much longer and much broader. So the frame was just longer along Santa
Well,
Rosa.
it was a different landform because coming off of the grade into the Buellton Flats was a whole different landform. And as we were looking at the different potential appellations within the region, we were looking at the landform so that between the ridge where the original boundary was to the west was its own basin. From the ridge here just west of the Hobbelee Ranch where the Sanford vineyards were is its own basin. And so there was more landform than not. And it's interesting to look where the valley oak trees stop growing, and that's pretty much the line. And that's right at the base of that hill. The last valley oak on 246 is right there. So
and also lupin. Lupin seems to have a very different blooming schedule. I find lupin is an excellent indicator species for for Pinot Noir bud break. That when I see those blue and purple leaves, I start thinking about bud break.
But it seems that if you look at the natural environment and the Oakland wood forests, it really tells us where Pinot Noir likes to grow.
Yes,
likes to be in the scrub oak.
You bet. I want to make sure, Bryan. I think I had one, at least another partial question for you, which was, is there a secret about the Santa Rita Hills, its people or its history that you'd like to share?
A secret?
Yeah. What's a secret about the Santa Rita Hills that no one knows? You've been pulling up there for long enough. You know some stuff.
Holding back for 20 years, Bryan.
It's not a secret that the whole thing has just been one big freak show. I mean,
I like that it all started out as a temperance colony.
Yes. If you didn't know, Lompoc was a temperance colony, and actually, if you watch the Prohibition, the great guy who makes the documentaries, it'll come to me. But he actually said that Lompoc becoming a temperance colony on the West Coast actually gave national prohibition a big push forward. So thanks, Lompoc. But,
I mean, in this business, winemakers, they're like artists, or they think they're artists. They're very, very creative, passionate people. Everybody in this business is a little whacked somehow. But I think therein lies the derivation of everybody's passion, the fascination for nature. Why Richard comes back from Vietnam, he says, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to dedicate myself to nature and wine growing. And, the fascination of planting a vineyard, picking those grapes and making that wine and smelling it for the first time, and then smelling it 40 years later and realizing, okay, maybe call it luck, call it whatever you want, but here we are. And I mean, the wines that are coming out of the appellation they're world class, and they're so beautifully put together, and the whole thing almost doesn't feel real. What's happened. Now, I don't know if that's a secret, but I guess if nothing else, it's just it's just part of the excitement. I almost think that our best days are ahead of us. I mean, it's so exciting what's been done.
We've had pretty good days.
Mind-boggling.
We've had pretty good days behind us too, Bryan.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it really feels, we are drawing the boundary lines. Because we all, before you have kids and you get crazy, but I mean, before I was married, and I would hang out with you guys, like in the 80s and the early 90s, and that's kind of just felt the same. We all just got together and piled in our trucks with a feeling like, okay, but this time there's some real significance to this. There's an importance to it that if we get this thing right, it could be something really cool, and that's exactly what happened.
Well, I think that to me, this appellation was the first appellation that was really done by growers who had an interest in defining the boundaries from a physical nature rather than marketing people who were defining boundaries to market wine. So there was a purity in this exercise, I think, that other regions probably don't have. And it was an all-inclusive kind of call that we were asking people who bought grapes from this region to participate, people who made, that's why we originally called it the Santa Rita Hills Growers Alliance, Wine Growers Alliance, because it was the growers that really were promoting the region. And interesting that now, all these years later, we do have 5 different growing regions within the San Ynez Valley, which we were originally part of.
That's perfectly put. I had a quick question from Nancy, and I think this is a good segue to move in. And a quick question: why do you think the area hasn't been recognized more for its world-class wines? And maybe I would have thought that 15 or 20 years ago when we were drinking all the wines that were coming out of the Santa Rita Hills because there wasn't enough planted acreage and not much wine was escaping. But now the wine's all over the world. I feel that we're the cool kids on the block, but we don't try too hard. And I remember what Peter Kargasaki, named Blast from the Past, said at one of our early meetings. We want to be the guys that don't try too hard. We don't want to be the guys that are writing a press release for everything we do. We don't have time to press release. We're watching the frost alarms. We're doing everything else. And I thought that was important. Before we move on, I want to give a 30-second tasting note on this 41-year-old Cabernet Sauvignon that I just opened, that I've been waiting for a very special. First of all, I wish I could wave a magic wand and turn it into Pinot Noir. That's number one. Number two, I love Bloody Marys, so I'm in heaven. This wine is all about tomato skin and that celery root, celery salt. It has some life left in it. I have to say I love old, fully mature wines, but this wine still has verve. This wine still has cut. A 41-year-old Cabernet Sauvignon from Sanford and Benedict is still alive, and I think that's pretty amazing. I think most people would smell it and say, that's not the style of wine that I love. But I'm going to share it with my wife after the show, and she loves sort of taking apart wines in their doted. And I don't think this wine's going to budge anymore for another 10 years. So here's to the last of the Sanford and Benedict Cabernet Sauvignon.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Well, maybe that's why we don't grow Cabernet there anymore.
Yes, I do know that it is gone. Okay,
Wes, if I could just add something about the secret, what I think one of the secrets of the Santa Rita Hills appellation is, it seems to me that the appellation, the soils, and the vineyards are what drive the winemakers, and not the other way around. I think in a lot of appellations, winemakers go to a particular area, just, they can set up camp almost anywhere, and they're going to make the kind of wine they want to make. But I think in Santa Rita Hills, the AVA and the characteristics, the terroir that we have, are what drive winemakers. And so I think there's a lot of cohesiveness of the wines because of that you don't get too many wild cards, with trying to make something that's not indicative of Santa Rita Hills. And I think that's the secret behind the AVA. It's so spectacular that, all winemakers tend to respect the fruit and what drives the AVA. So that's, to me, the secret.
I think that's absolutely true. The way I kind of explained it, and I think it's sort of analogous, is saying that my time at Clopepi, I felt like a kicker on a Super Bowl team. The dirt and my crew did all the work, and then in the end, I just make sure that I make my extra points, kick the field goal in the last 30 seconds, and it's a Super Bowl win. And I don't think there's a lot of jobs where the place you work and the environment that you work carries you, like the dirt and the climate and those amazing winds and everything else. Hearing a little bit of your typing, Bryan, but
is that me?
Is it?
I'm not touching.
Someone's typing passionately, which So I wanted to finish, and we're about 5-7 minutes left in the original hour that we planned. is recalling some of the secrets. I actually wrote an article today for the Sommelier Journal about the secrets of the Santa Rita Hills, and a few of these were included. I did not include the story about Bryan killing a marauding ostrich. Are you comfortable with telling that story, Bryan?
It was actually an emu.
Tell us the story.
It had wandered over from a neighboring property, and they had come over a couple times, and so we had to call the neighbor and to let him know once again their emus were eating the Pinot Noir. And on this particular day, my neighbor just said, "You know what? I was getting really close to harvesting that one anyway. So why don't you just do me a favor and shoot it?" So actually, goes kind of helped him with the butchering process.
I do remember something like
industry altogether.
Yes, no, I remember something along the line of Dawn, come get this bird out of my vineyard. It's eating my Pinot Noir, or we're going to have an extraordinary barbecue. And I do remember something about an extraordinary barbecue.
And I got to tell you, emu, that's a pretty big bird, so you got to pull the trigger a few times to,
I remember a 12 gauge, but I do remember walking in that morning when you were walking out of the vineyard with a smoking shotgun. So here's a story that has never been told in public. Yes, it was cold, but it was to protect the grapes and, of course, for all that delicious protein. The story I have about Shut Up Bruno, I don't know if you guys remember the day we found out that we got the AVA. We were all like, we went to the map room. It was at Sanford, El Javali, and Richard stood up and in the most calm voice possible, "Guys, we got it." We went crazy, and then Bruno D'Alfonso, the winemaker at the time at Sanford, stood up and said, guys, shut up. You guys do realize, even though I'm excited, that this whole thing should be 2 AVAs split north and south. And I think all of us looked at him and just like, shut up, Bruno. We loved Bruno. It was just that moment where he kind of took us down a step. Whether or not the Santa Rita Hills can ever be broken up into 2 complete AVAs, I think is arguable, but I wanted to share that a little bit. And then Santa to STA, a bilingual tale of wine and tri-tip. I think I'm going to turn this one over for maybe 3 or 4 minutes of the story of your visit to Chile and what happened afterwards to Richard Sanford.
Thanks, Wes. It turns out in 1997, we got together, proposed a thing. Finally, it was granted, and we were relieved and had great celebrations. One Saturday, the Justice Department calls my home. Tekla, my wife, answers the phone, and they say, "Is Mr. Sanford there?" She almost fell off her chair, but they were asking my help because they had a lawsuit going on for the VATF, having not done a proper granting of the AVA. It turns out there was a winery in Chile called Vineyard Santa Rita. And I learned later they're 120 years old and they made 3 million cases of wine a year. And we didn't know anything about them at the time. Well, we went through lots of back and forth with their attorneys, and I actually met the people. Tekla and I were marketing our wines largely in Europe at that time. And at the London Wine Trade Fair, I marched over to the booth and introduced myself and said, we're reasonable people. We don't want to cause problems. Can we resolve this issue? And I suggested I would come to Santiago and visit with them. So later that year, I went to Chile and met the owner. He was a wonderful guy. We hit it off well. And I saw their entire spread. It's a wonderful older winery south of Santiago. Anyway, after long deliberations and a nice lunch, with Ricardo Cuero, who was the owner. I proposed that the problem was using the same script and the confusion with his wines. And so ultimately the proposal was to use the STA period as our appellation, and he would continue to use the Santa. And it was a very gentlemanly conversation. And it turned out the guy at Ropes and Gray, who was the attorney for them, contacted me, and then we were challenged by going back to the BATF. I came back and met with our group, and ultimately, I think everybody signed on, although ultimately they were requiring that we change the name to something different. There wasn't really anything different that we could come up with. And so we all agreed that the abbreviated would be better, because people talking about the appellation would say Santa, and it was distinctive enough to be different from the Viña Santa Rita. So then we had to go apply. I think, Wes, you reapplied for us.
Actually, Ropes, the Viña Santa Rita paid for the entire reapplication.
Oh, Ropes and Gray. Yeah.
Yeah. So they paid.
I went to Washington with Peter Brody, the attorney for Ropes and Gray, because we had to go see the chief of the BATF to see that if he would grant an appellation to an appellation which had been granted just a few or a year before. And we had to get his wink. We had to meet with him, and we did. And I'll always remember, because it was soon after 9/11, and there was huge security around the BATF building. But we went to some floor in the BATF and met with 14 attorneys and the chief, and he winked at Peter Brody and myself. And so that's when I came back to our group and said that we have an opportunity here. And ultimately, we gave a big celebration to our friends, our Viña Santa Rita friends, and they threw us a barbecue, remember, Wes? And we had great relations with those people. So it really, Peter Brody announced to the chief that this could cause an international incident. And so that caused them to change and go along with us with the change of the appellation.
Yeah, and that was finally amended in 2006 officially. But if you actually look at the timing, most of us adopted basically the abbreviation STA in the 2001 and 2002 vintages. So we showed really good bonhomie, I think, to our Chilean friends to push that whole thing forward. So now you kind of know the real story behind the name change. Well, we're just about out of time. I wanted to make sure, and I want to start with Rick. Rick, if people want to buy your wines, find out more about Longoria wines, about what you're doing, where would they go and what would they do?
Well, we're happily ensconced in Midtown Lompoc. So we have a beautiful tasting room, kind of a historic building that we restored, and we're welcome. We're now in the orange tier in Santa Barbara County, so we're doing tastings indoors. We've got a nice spacious tasting room, so we can accommodate 15 to 20 people. So, and website is www.longoriawine.com for more information about our wines. And come to Lompoc.
And if I've got 3 Lompoc tasting rooms to hit, number 1 is always Longoria. You guys are doing such an amazing job.
Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Rick.
you, Wes.
And love to you and the fam. Bryan, what's going on? Tell us about your social media. Tell us a little bit about your website. Tell us about your tasting room.
We have the coolest tasting room on the planet. It's been designed by my wife, Lisa, who is a genius at putting an atmosphere together. When we cut our production in half about 10 years ago, it gave us back one of our warehouses. So it's a 5,000 square foot industrial space that Lisa has turned into like this organism of soul. It's like, it's vintage, it's music, it's art. Of course, there's some decent wine in there as well. But it's just, I mean, you just have to see it. Everybody that walks through the room, their eyes adjust and they just go, wow. You just have to see it to believe it. Spend some time with us and hang out. We got plenty of space and plenty of tables, both indoors. Now that we're on the code red, we're back indoors serving in there, and we have lots of outdoor tables as well. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's just part of the evolution of the Santa Rita Hills. And it certainly has inspired me to actually come up with a whole new concept for the vineyard and the property called agristhetics, which I define as agristhetics is the treatment of an agricultural domain as a piece of art. So if Lisa can take a 5,000 square foot warehouse and turn it into this one orgasmic piece of art, then why can't I take a 100-acre canvas of dirt and do the same? And that's kind of what I'm working on right now.
Cool.
And it's, springtime, summertime. I mean, Santa Rita Hills, go see Rick, go see Richard. Almarosa is doing some great things. Their vineyard is amazing. His wines are amazing. They always have been. And it's all good. And we have so many neighbors now. There's so many new wineries. It's just a critical mass of amazingness. And you just come see it.
Absolutely. And you just sparked a quick 30-second memory. My first article that I ever wrote for wine was an article called "Is Winemaking Art or Craft?" You took craft because you said epistemologically that art is the recreation of a concrete that is not the same concrete. A painting, a Rodin statue, which is not really, Dante, and that craft was a creation of something that is real, that is concrete. It seems like your ideas of art have changed a little bit. It's not a good time to talk epistemology now, but it's nice to know that your ideas of art are broadening in your dotage. So I'm stoked I'm able to say that. And then Rick, for the same article, I quoted him saying it is craft, but certain winemakers can elevate it to art because they can take it outside and posit their own individual style upon the craft, which makes it a representation of a concrete. So somewhere between here and there, we've discovered something. I don't know what it is. I'm confused. But I will say I'm on my second glass of the 1980 Sanford and Benedict Cabernet Sauvignon. So it's not dead. It's not. That's verve, baby. That's cut. So to close us out, make sure, Richard, you take your mute off and tell us a little bit about how people can follow what you're doing with Almarosa.
Well, it's a very exciting time for me, Wes, as I've transited from some different vineyards, and I've had the opportunity to work with Bob Zorek, the new owner of, not so new anymore, of Almarosa Winery. He and I planned to plant the ranch that was our original ranch, which we sold him a few years ago, and we designed some new plantings to put some different clones in the right aspect and the place that we felt they were going to do the best. And we've got a terrific new winemaker, Samra Morris, from Bosnia, of all things. Wow. And she's a wonderful person and a great talent. And this new vineyard here on the original Rancho Javali is now producing after 5 years of effort. It's you think back at all of this and you imagine planting a grapevine. It takes time. Yeah. It takes a lot of time and effort and patience. But here we're at the point now where we have the fruition of a new vineyard planting. And I can't tell you the excitement of having a new vineyard producing for the first time and just to recognize the potential of what's there. And it just always amazes me.
So your tasting room is also right next to Industrial East, which does not suck in any
right
way.
There, or actually, Wes, Industrial East is next to Almarosa tasting room.
Nice. Nice.
Oh, it's for
But
me.
really, please stop by at our tasting room in Buellton, and we look forward to welcoming you.
You bet. And
Also,
make sure to get
our website, Omarosa Winery, all of our wines are available. So come see us.
get a little duck prosciutto and then go over to what made Industrial Eats, which of course is the Almarosa tasting room. I want to thank you guys all for hanging out and putting together a little bit of this wonderful history that we've had. I want to make sure we got all the information. Rick, did you share your particulars?
Yeah, I think I did. Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry.
We're in Midtown Lompoc, and the website I gave. So,
You know, of course.
Wes, thank you so much for your
You
important,
are
critical role in establishing the AVA. Thank you very much, and your continued support of it. Thank you.
I'm a kicker on the Super Bowl team.
Every AVA needs a poet warrior, and you are that. You are that dude.
Well, you raised me. You raised me, dude. So you took me from a 25-year-old high school English teacher to a pretty badass winemaker. So
I love guys like you and Longoria and Sanford. I love it when you wear your passion on your sleeve, and it's infectious. And it's one of the reasons this has become such a great place.
Same to you, Brian. Same to you, Brian.
Guys, passion. And hey, on that note, a shout out to our wives who have supported us.
Yeah.
There you go. Some very strong ladies in our lives that are supporting
Absolutely. To Diana.
Our husband.
the true power behind Flo Pepe was my wife. Absolutely. I want to close tonight with the words that I used to hang in my classroom at Eisenhower High School in Rialto, California, where Ronnie Lott actually went way back. And it was a quote from William Butler Yeats, who said, "Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire." I hope we've sparked something interesting to everybody tonight. And I really do appreciate everyone's time. Thanks for hanging out. Go drink these wines, support Santa Rita Hills. And I do appreciate everything. And I'll also say that when I met Bryan Babcock in 1994 at the Hitching Post, I asked him, should I go to Davis or Fresno? He said, you could do either and still not know how to hook up a hose or drive a forklift. So come work for me for minimum wage. And I said, I really want to make Pinot Noir. And he said, there's drugs you can take to prevent that. And I said, I already did them all in college and I still want to make Pinot Noir. So thanks for taking me on. Thanks for listening to us tonight. I think we had a great opportunity to learn a lot about the Santa Rita Hills, and watch the Santa Rita Hills website for more of these webinars that are celebrating our 20th anniversary. Thanks, everybody. Wear a mask. Be careful in plague times, and let's increase human flourishing, because that's what it's all about.
Right. Cheers.
Cheers, everybody.